We've heard of nearshoring, we've heard of offshoring, we've heard of reshoring, and now Sureshoring. Topic of my conversation today with Brian Glick. He is CEO of Chain.io. Well, hello, Brian.
Hi.
Why don't you explain, these constant disruptions of the last 18 months certainly have a lot of people thinking about the concept of nearshoring manufacturing. Along comes your concept of Sureshoring. What is that?
So this is something that came out of a range of conversations with people across the industry, looking at the fact that over the last 20 years, we've always tried to focus on single solutions, right? We're going to outsource or we're going to bring it back, but that the right answer in a complicated world is a hybrid approach, is making sure that it's another way to stand in for the word resilience and to say that we have enough technology and enough sophistication in our supply chains now to be sure that we have product by multi-sourcing and by looking at diverse supply chains where we don't have a single point of failure, whether that's domestic or foreign. So that's really the core concept.
So this is an outgrowth of the new awareness of the importance of risk mitigation and supply chain resiliency.
Absolutely, and also the ability now to do things about it. So 20 years ago, you could be aware of that risk mitigation, but nobody had the technology to manage sourcing the same SKU from 4 countries. That was implausible. With 3D printing, with advanced supply chain technology, it's becoming easier, especially in lighter industries like apparel and footwear and food, to start looking at these things instead of just saying we have a very simplistic supply chain where everything's going to come from China and tomorrow everything's going to come from Vietnam.
Well, with complexity comes additional challenges of managing that complexity on a global scale. Sure, it's great that you're less open to problems in one location, but then you've got a more complex global supply chain to manage. How do you do that? Is technology the answer?
I think it is, and it's also some basic principles, right? That if you do visibility right, if you do supplier management right, larger brands especially have gotten good enough where they can take on these problems now. And we also, in the US here, tend to take a very US inbound centric view of the world. But if you look at large brands with a global presence, supply chain moves in every direction already. Sourcing from Italy to go to Brazil or whatever the case may be. So it's already that complex. Let's just use that from a risk mitigation standpoint.
Okay, so we've got approximately 70 ships offshore the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles. In fact, I just heard the number's gone up to 75. Whatever the number is, it's a terrible congestion problem. Once again, can technology save the day? How do we solve this problem?
Well, I think if we stand here and talk long enough, we'll get it up to 80. So
okay.
Let's see what we can do.
Let's see what we can do about that.
That seems to be a theme at the show. Let's see who can come up with the biggest number.
Right.
So technology can't solve every problem. But what technology can do is help people understand and react. And I think one of the things, there's dangerous words around automation when you're talking about the ports and labor and all of these things. But as a shipper, I think one of the lessons from all of this is owning your own data and understanding that when these congestion problems happen, or when we had the port strike, or when we have hurricanes, that the companies that can see their own data and are not reliant on 2 or 3 steps of intermediaries have the ability to react. So when we had the last LA port strike, we worked with a lot of companies who could reroute their freight up to Vancouver, work with a customs broker to move it and get it back down into the US. If you don't do the proper blocking and tackling now, you can't deal with that problem when it happens. So core fundamental data integrity is so important. It's not going to stop the ships from being there, but it's going to allow you to react better than your competitors when you're both literally stuck on that same boat.
Tell me more about what it means to own your own data.
So over the course of the last couple of generations of technology, a lot of companies relied on their freight providers, on their 3PLs, on their 4PLs, and so on. And they kind of lost connection to actually understanding specifically what was happening at the port. I was talking to somebody yesterday during one of the sessions who mentioned that he doesn't trust the data that's in his TMS because he's pretty sure his freight forwarder is just keying milestones willy-nilly by hand, right? That they can't see the traceability all the way back to the vessel. And the promise that we all heard 3 or 4 years ago at these shows was IoT and real visibility, physical GPS and all of this. Well, it's time for shippers to understand that they do have control now to get at data that before you had to rely on a freight forwarder for, because literally the only way to get it was they were calling the port and asking a question and typing it into the system. Now there's the ability to make these investments so that when we have the next disruption, and that's what we're always thinking about, is not necessarily, IT is not going to solve today's problem, it's going to solve the next one. That next time you have a better picture of the world than just being reliant on second and third hand information.
So owning the data means visibility to the data.
It means yes. It
And
means
the willingness
visibility.
of your supply chain partners to supply the data to you in the first place, right?
Yeah. And it doesn't just mean visibility. It also means the ability to execute, right? So
to do something with it.
can I send a message to my providers, or have direct APIs with the airlines? So the team from Delta was mentioning that today during the show about API connectivity and being able to sometimes go not use an intermediary and sometimes use them for very good reasons. But this idea that you have control of your destiny if you can see the data and you can operationalize it and make these decisions, as opposed to having a visibility platform that sits on the side and is nice and tells you everything's broken, but you can't do anything about it.
Okay. All right. So you say it's important not just to address the problem of today, the problem of tomorrow is also important. What about the problem of 5 years from now? How can supply chains deal with the crises that are going to pop up then?
So I went back and took a look at a presentation I gave 5 years ago about IT buzzwords and key trends. And the same themes from 5 years ago still apply today and will still apply 5 years from now. And visibility is the hot one right now, but operational execution, data integrity, and the basic blocking and tackling. One of the lessons that I like to share with forwarders, especially, is we all in the forwarding business used to be able to hide behind a quarterly business review, and the idea that I don't have to do a good job for the first 12 weeks, as long as we get all the data clean for the 13th week when we get our KPIs measured. And that essentially we're all leaning over each other's shoulders now, all day, every day. And so what companies can do to prepare for that on either side is think about APIs, but the buzzword doesn't really matter. Think about microtransactions and think about the fact that all of your partners in your network should really be collaborating in real time, which doesn't mean the same business process that we've done for 20 years, just a little faster. But what happens when you break down all these parts even smaller and you're able to tender international freight on a millisecond basis instead of 2 weeks to get a quote, and really start breaking all these processes down? And we'll find that tech will allow us to re-enable them in much more collaborative ways. But it takes everyone working together. And as a shipper, you have to drive your service providers there because they're not going to go there necessarily on their own.
So Brian, how does Chain.io help its customers to achieve these goals we've been talking about?
So to accomplish all of these goals, there are hundreds and hundreds of companies, each of which run hundreds and hundreds of software packages that all have to collaborate. And underneath all of that, those companies have to align on technology and they have to align on business process. And it's very, very hard to bring all of that together. So what we've done is we've built a platform that is essentially the plumbing underneath all of that. So we connect to all the major players in the software space, in logistics, and allow companies to attach without having to do a 1-year IT project every single time they want to bring on a new system or a new service provider. We bring that down to weeks so that people can be more agile and can experiment with new technologies.
Brian, thank you so much for explaining to me what Sureshoring is, to add another shoring type option, and the importance of it these days in creating supply chains that are resilient, that are risk management oriented. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it. I've been speaking with Brian Glick of Chain.io. Thank you very much for watching.